Good evening, buenas noches. My name is Liz Fernandez. I am the Job Fair Administrator, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this panel. This webinar is about career transitions from lots of different places to independent schools. In just a moment, I'm going to welcome our three panelists who will share a little bit about their experiences. If you are watching this live and would like to pose a question, please feel free to do so via the chat feature and send them directly to me. If you are watching this at your own leisure and have any additional questions or are wondering about how to move forward and how to prepare, I am always available, and you can reach me at jobfair@nysais.org. That's JOBFAIR at NYSAIS.org. All of these webinars are being arranged and offered in order to prepare the candidates for the 2024 NYSAIS Job Fair to Promote Diversity, which will be held on Saturday, February 24th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Columbia Grammar and Prep on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. In advance of the 10 a.m. start, we encourage candidates to please arrive about 9:30, no later than 9:30, to get a last-minute Q&A and set up for the morning to ensure that you are ready for a successful day of networking. I also want to remind everyone that if you have not registered for the job fair, which is free to our candidates, we encourage you to do so as soon as possible, and certainly ideally by this Friday, February 16th. We will be reviewing all resumes over the weekend and uploading them as the data to the database, and then providing access to our school representatives early next week. As a pre-registered candidate, you definitely want to get your resume in advance of them going live to maximize the number of schools that review your professional profile in advance of the job fair on Saturday, the 24th. So without further ado, I want to invite our panelists to speak. I will ask Elena, Akosua, and Ray to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about the work that they currently do, the type of school that they work in, and what was their previous career or position that they transitioned from. Thanks so much. So excited to have this conversation with the three of you, and looking forward to our time together.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Elena Alvarez. I am the Director of Global and Community Engagement at the Dalton School in New York, which is a coeducational K through 12 independent school on the Upper East Side. It's my first year at Dalton. I was at the Trinity School for about 7 years prior. And then even before that, I came from a background in finance. I was in investment banking at a small firm on Wall Street for about 3 years post-undergrad.
And you are also...
I am also a graduate of an independent school. I graduated from Poly Prep in 2009.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Akosua Yeboah. I use she, her pronouns. I am currently an associate director of college counseling at the Ethical Culture Fieldston School, which is a progressive independent school in Riverdale in the Bronx. I have been at Fieldston now for, I'm going into my 6th year at Fieldston. And prior to being at Fieldston, I like to think I did a little bit of everything. I worked in charter schools before that. I worked in public schools before that. And then I worked in on the university side in admissions for some years before that. So I've done a bit of everything and made a bunch of transitions throughout my career. And it's lovely to be here and share any insight I can with all of you tonight.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Ray Fernandez. Good evening. I'm currently the assistant head of school at Columbia Grammar and Prep, which is where the job fair is being held. So looking forward to seeing you all there. So I'm in my 4th year in this role, and similar to Akosua, I sort of have, it's not really my transition into CGPS, as we call it, was not like my first time in independent schools. I'd actually worked at 3 independent schools. I attended one too. I went to Riverdale Country School in New York. And then I worked at, like I said, 3 independent schools, but then I decided just to leave. I went to the for-profit world for about 13 years and um, did a bunch of educational for-profit work. It was in the test prep, standardized test prep industry for adults. So it was different in a lot of ways, but similar in some ways too. And decided to make my way back into it's like the mob, they pull you back in. So I'm back. I'm in my 4th year at CGPS. I'm also getting over a cold. So if I have to like pause or mute rather to cough, that's what's happening. So great to be here.
So excited to really leverage your experiences. Tell us a little bit about your professional journey. So even if you've been an alum, why transition from finance, or why transition from higher ed, or why come back to schools? Like, what was the reason why independent schools lured you back and have you lucky to have you within the schools? Um, Tell us what unfolded. Elena Ray Okosawa.
Ultimately, if I could condense it into a sentence, it's that I wasn't happy in finance. I came into finance kind of bumbling after undergrad. I needed job skills desperately that I wasn't able to acquire in undergrad because being a, lower middle income kid from a non-privileged background, I didn't know how to go about getting internships on Wall Street or on the Capitol, right? I went to school in DC. I wanted to go into the nonprofit world. It wasn't happening. So I came back home. I started temping in finance. They gave me an offer. I stuck it out because I wanted to try something new and again to get skills. And it was an unfavorable environment, to put it generously. It was a small firm, male dominated. I was one of 2 women and one of 3 people of color. And every single day was kind of like a pressure cooker working in there, with many different personalities and many different demands from people. So I decided one day that I needed to transition and I needed to transition quickly. So as I was looking for other jobs, I realized that I still didn't have like to me, a complete like skill set, right, to enter into a mid-level job. I still needed to look for entry-level roles and I needed it to be in a more forgiving environment than finance. So I started to look at what I was familiar with, and that was independent schools, really. I came up in an independent school. I went to poly prep for 7 years throughout middle and high school. And it was an environment that I was familiar with. It was an environment that I was comfortable with. And ultimately, for all of its challenges, coming through an independent school as a person of color, I still really enjoyed the experience. So I found my position at Trinity. It was for the Equity and Belonging Office, and it was for the Global Engagement Office. 2 very different offices, but still 2 really important programs that I felt were lacking in my own independent school experience. So I thought it would be cool to work under these 2 really incredible leaders and learn more skills and give kids the opportunity to get this programming and these resources that I didn't get at my school growing up.
Yeah, for me, I thought that I mentioned that I'd been at schools before. So I worked at a boarding school for a year, which was the longest year of my life. I then worked at all-girls school for 3 years, and then I moved to California and worked at a school there. And in my time in the California school, that was my first taste of administration, and I really enjoyed it. And for me, the thing that's been driving my decisions about what my next move should be has really been about, am I learning anything? Am I still learning as I'm going? And so, what prompted me to actually ditch, which was always the plan was always to make it temporary. The reason I decided to leave independent schools for a time is that I want to go back to school. I want to get my MBA, which I did. And just happenstance, I just, did a part-time job at that test prep company. And then over time, I ended up being the general manager of the company, which was an incredible opportunity and experience. And then as soon as we were acquired by another company, and then suddenly my conversations were less and less about teaching and learning and less about teachers and students. and more about Wall Street and more about, who are we going to lay off so that we can hit our numbers this quarter. That's what reminded me, oh, wait, the plan was always to go back to schools, to bring some of these skills to independent schools, where I think that the skills are actually really needed. And so that's what got me on my journey to go back to schools. I have to say, there's something about the independent school environment that really speaks to me. I think it's important to acknowledge that. I think, you know, schools are populated with a bunch of outgoing nerds. I mean, that's what a school is. It's like a big bag of nerds. And if that's your people, then that's your people. And so that's my people. And so I just wanted to be back in that environment. And I'm also grateful. I mean, as I said, I'm a product of independent schools, and it was important. I got a lot out of that experience, and I wanted to go back to schools to continue with that payback and that sort of that contribution back to kids. Like, I really missed working with kids, and so I think it was important for me to do that.
On my end, I am a public school kid, so I attended public schools my entire life. And so, to be very frank with all of you, some of my first exposure to independent schools, I would say broadly across the country, the landscape of them was when I started working in admissions. And for while I worked in admissions for almost 7 years, and this particular stint for 7 years. And during the time that I was in admissions, I actually had New York as one of my territories. And so um, during the time I was working in admissions, I actually spent a lot of time at the school I currently work at. And a lot of my experiences with independent schools, I think, showed me what education could have been for me. And I think a lot of my experiences stuck with me. The more I think I saw a great deal more personalized learning than I had been accustomed to, that I saw, of course, a great deal many more resources. That I saw that people got to use their ideas and their autonomy more as adults in the building. And I think that my experiences in public and charter education were incredible, and incredible learning spaces, and spaces that I really attribute to what I'm good at in a lot of ways, professionally. And I think for me, it wasn't so much ultimately discovering that I felt like independent schools were a better environment for me, but they were something different. And I felt they would give me a different skill set. I think they would give me different exposure. And I thought I would be able to work with kids in the way I've always really wanted to. And that has been true for me, actually, in my time working in independent schools. But I think what has continued to keep me engaged and make me want to continue working in independent schools are some of the things I mentioned before. I think the amount of time I get to spend with an individual student, supporting them, um, getting to be a mentor, getting to be a source of insight about how they can make choices for themselves. I think I get to do those things in a different and distinct way than I've been able to before. And so for me, it's been almost more of a full circle moment. One of my favorite stories to tell is that I worked with a student when I was in admissions who actually attended the Spence School and ended up being her brother's counselor when I first started working at Fieldston, and getting to see a family kind of all the way through a process that I participate in was really exciting for me. And I love having so many more of those moments now.
Thank you all. So much of what our schools really do is they really center two things, and this webinar and all of these webinars really, I think, continue to highlight. The first is relationships, and the examples that you all gave really center the relationships that we are able to foster with students and families, regardless of the roles that we're in, and also with colleagues. And the second is the power of storytelling. And this is really what we are centering in these conversations, so that those of you that are listening will really be able to gain some insight and really learn from the experiences, so that you can enter both the networking space on Saturday February 24th, and just in general, pursue employment at an independent school. And I might add, several people have also pursued independent schools for their children as a result of both attending the job fair and listening to these webinars. The level of dedication, the caliber of educators that exists in our schools is really spectacular, present company, of course, included. I was hoping that you each could speak more specifically to some of the transferability of skills that you have from your previous employments, plural, and how you were able to apply them to this role. I also want to recognize that, Ray, you mentioned that you went and pursued an MBA, so you went to graduate school in addition to and really added to your suitcase of tools. So think about that and really try to hone in as we've received a question. What exactly are schools looking for? And so it would be really wonderful to think about what's transferable about your skills that you've been able to apply in your role, and then really think more broadly, what do you think schools are looking for in that career transition candidate? So we can also honor that question. Akosua, Elena, and Ray.
I actually want to address some of the second part of that question first, which is what schools are looking for, because it was actually something that came up in my own in my own experience transitioning into independent schools, particularly because I had experience working in independent schools, but it was kind of from the outside looking in as opposed to internally, and that was actually a really interesting transition for me specifically. But I would say that one thing that was helpful for me, just being very frank, was the fact that, particularly in my role, deep knowledge of independent schools academically, everything from the course of studies to how the schools understand rigor, to how they teach, to what skill set students are encouraged to learn. All of those things were things that, as an admissions officer, I had to deeply know about the schools that I was working with, public, charter, parochial, independent, whatever. I had to know those kinds of things. And so, to be frank, I walked in already knowing what I was getting into academically. And I know that that was something that they were looking for from me, that I had some knowledge and deep understanding of the ways in which independent schools like to distinguish themselves, I think, academically. And I would say that to anyone who's looking to work in independent schools, getting your hands on that kind of information is really, really helpful, because I do think it is among the most defining, of course, aspects of any independent school community, right? I would say some transferable skills that just for me worked quite well is I think, somewhat naturally a people person, and the nature of the work that I do, which is really at its core just advising students. You have to kind of break through and build rapport really quickly, because the nature of what I do requires me to know a lot about a kid really early on. And I would say that being prepared to work with students with really distinct stories is going to be true in any context. But I find, because independent schools focus so much on personalized attention, in particular, the ability to build rapport with students, to understand where they're coming from, to understand a student having multiple stories, to understand their identities, all of those different kinds of things, was something I had to build up working in education before. I will say a little bit about what I did before to build context. Prior to being at Fieldston, I actually had a role where I was teaching, I was curriculum writing, I was a college counselor, and I was a supervisor of a bunch of teachers and college counselors. And so having to wear several different hats, I think, is also a transferable skill in any context, but particularly in independent schools. Because I think that at any moment you can be called to support a kid or called to support another adult. And I find that skill set applies equally in either direction. I'm going to just pause because I don't want to take up all of the time the time here, but I think those are things that I at least think that are top of mind for me.
Thinking back to my entry point into independent schools when I was interviewing, I was a licensed stockbroker. I had my Series 7 and I had my Series 63, and that absolutely does not apply to independent schools. And I was interviewing for an admin assistant position. So what my then managers cared about was attention to detail. They cared about the fact that I could balance the books and manage a couple $100,000 worth of budgetary funds. They cared about the fact that I could pivot really easily, work well under pressure. Because as you know, schools are a really fast-paced environment. And the clock doesn't stop just because you have work to do. The world still moves around you. What else? A sense of humor, even though a sense of humor in finance varies differently from a sense of humor in independent schools. And yeah, that's it. They just cared that I knew how to do the work. I knew how to put my head down and get work done, because at the end of the day, even though they were two amazing managers and two visionary leaders, they were less concerned with details. So they needed somebody to step in and handle the details for them.
Yeah, I can chime in here. I think independent schools are really interesting in that, at the core, and this is somewhat changing. I mean, my first job at an independent school was back in the 1900s, so things have changed a little bit since. And Liz and I both started around the same time. And by the way, Liz and I, no relation, but we still go back a bit. And back then you would just submit a resume, and the schools would just be like, yeah, so you don't have a teaching credential, so you haven't studied a whole lot in terms of pedagogy, but we're gonna go for it. We're just gonna see how this works, right? And so those people who were in those roles, again, without a whole lot of, like, those schools were not recruiting out of education schools that much. It was pretty rare. It was really just, do you have expertise in this field? And then let's see if you can, become a good teacher. Like, we'll help you become a good teacher. That's kind of the canonical independent school way. Well, those folks continued, and like they sort of ascend through schools, and now they're in these leadership roles and administrative roles, and they're hiring people. And so in a lot of cases, they're looking for folks who have, they're not so wedded to, do you have credentials? Again, that's changing a little bit, I'm seeing. But I think the independent schools are willing to take a risk on people. I do have to say, though, that when it comes for people who are coming from non-traditional backgrounds, so folks that this session was for, it's a little bit of a different challenge, right? In the sense that the folks who are on the hiring teams, they have a sense of what they think they want, but they may not know what they need, right? And so because of the way that folks ascend through organizations and independent schools, there are lots of skills that are really valuable to a school. Things like, organizational behavior, just marketing skills, knowing how to use Excel. Like, I mean, just the number of people who know how to use Excel outside the business office is incredibly low at a school. And so just like knowing how to use a spreadsheet, like not just like it's paper, but like really use a spreadsheet. Like, these are skills that are just not commonly found at a school. They're very marketable, and they can really change the professionalism and the way that a school sees itself and operates. But I think we've, like, coming from these roles into an independent school, we have to make the case. We have to actually say, this is what you need, right? And so, like, a story for me was, I'd had 10 years plus of working in schools, 3 different schools. I took a hiatus, and it was a very corporate, trajectory for me, but I was ready to go back. And I wouldn't even get calls back when I threw my resume into searches. So, there was one search in particular that I thought, right, I have to speak to the search consultant. Like, what's going, I need to know what's going on, and I'm not even getting calls back. And what they told me was, we just thought you were too corporate. And so I said, okay, well, help me. Like, how can I do this differently? And so the advice, which in the end worked, was to really put front and center that schools, right? So it was like rethinking my resume and my cover letter to really make it clear to the hiring team, to the search committee, that this is not as big a risk as you might think. I understand schools. I'm not completely new to this environment. And to say, like I said at the start, this is why what I can bring to the school is unique and different and needed. Let me actually make that case to you. And so, it wasn't like suddenly that like the floodgates were open and I was getting all these callbacks, but at least a few more schools they understood it better. And to go back to this idea of relationships, when I first started in my school career, it was enough just to send in a resume. And that's not true anymore. Like relationships matter. And so going to the fair, for example, like meeting people face to face, talking to the consultants for a search. These are things that really matter to schools now. You could easily get lost and not noticed if you don't do that, but you absolutely can increase your chances of being noticed if you take the time and effort to show up in person and to actually have a conversation with someone who's on the search team. So I spoke for a long time. I apologize, but this was like, for me, this was my biggest learning coming back in, which is, we have to make the case for ourselves. And in fact, we're not blowing smoke. Like it's actually true. Schools need people who understand how to run an effective meeting, for example. Like these are skills that like really, really matter to schools.
Absolutely. And panelists, please do not apologize. The depth and value of your comments is really what we want to showcase. So we're good. I want to give our audience additional context. I've worked with candidates who are attorneys and have been practicing attorneys who have been in the financial world like Elena. There have been a couple of researchers, medical researchers to be specific. There have been a few engineers. Um, and overall, what Ray just said about putting front and center their interest in working in schools and their understanding about schools is key and critical. And one of the ways that you can do that, of course, is in a cover letter, is really centering, taking some of the language from the position description and integrating it into your lived experience and finding ways that there are connections. If you are an independent school alum, sharing a story about your experience working with, a teacher, a coach, an advisor, a mentor who was particularly supportive to you, or even if you're not an independent school alum, I hope that we have all had adults in our lives who are in education, regardless of where we went to school, that have really made significant impacts in our lives. So thinking about that, the other thing that I wanted to point out is the idea of credentials. Certification is not a requirement for independent schools. There is some variance, as was previously mentioned, in the primary division of variance is usually in the lower divisions. And so whereas assistant or associate teachers used to be great entry points with no master's degree education, now we have candidates who have a master's degree or are just about to complete it, applying for assistant or associate teaching positions and are having a greater challenge because it's a much more competitive pool. And some of that has to do with where you've gone to school, that the nature of the courses that you've taken, your ability to really present your candidacy as viable to a particular division. In middle and upper school, I have seen less insistence on having a teaching certification. I think those of you that have undergraduate degrees from liberal arts, we were all taught that, those liberal arts degrees, learning how to flex and use the language, your ability to synthesize tons of information in a short period of time, you can talk about transferability of those skills into, being in a classroom in a teaching situation where you're also doing the same thing and really condensing several weeks worth of information into a report for a student, for instance, and how valuable that is for a family to and for a student primarily to understand the ways in which the arc of their growth is unfolding in your particular class. There are also skills that we transfer into non-instructional positions in our schools. And some of those opportunities, I think, are also important to note. I'm curious.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry, may I jump
please,
right there? Because
please.
there's one thing when you said non-instructional.
Mhm.
I will actually say the thing that has been really impactful for me, so I want to note this, is really being able to speak to being a systems thinker at all. What I find is often true in independent schools, in my own experience, is that things can be decentralized. Decision making can sometimes be decentralized or really or internalized to a department. And that's not to say that there isn't obviously partnership across departments and all of that. There often is, but sometimes there isn't. And I think a lot of the problem solving that I've had to speak to has been around systems thinking, like, how do we organize this? How do we turn this into a sustainable system? How do we, things of that nature. So just wanted to throw that in there.
Fantastic, because between systems thinker, using words like collaboration, your collaborator, innovation, problem solving, uh, departments, grade levels, divisions, roles. Tell me what position exists in our school that doesn't do some level of collaborating, some level of system thinking, some level of data analysis. I mean, they all do. And so really centering that information. I want to continue that and really give our candidates more in-depth understanding of what they can expect from the hiring process. So Ray, I feel like you just started and then paused, so I'm going to ask you to start, and then Elena and Akosua, whichever one of you wants to continue. Just, what should candidates expect from the hiring process? Think about it from the perspective of for a teaching position and for a non-teaching position in the traditional sense. What should they expect?
Sure, yeah, I could talk about what happened to CGPS, and I think it's probably representative of what a lot of schools do. Of course, there's always little variances here and there. I think by and large, I'll just start with teaching roles. Multiple rounds of interviews. Typically starts off with a quick screen, usually on Zoom. And like frankly, we have your resume, we've read your cover letter, we think there's something there, right? And so I think that initial screen is about like, are you a human being? Like, can you carry a conversation? Are you personable? Like, can we imagine you, being with a group of kids? Like, that's really what that first talk is about. And then the subsequent roles are more about the technical and components of the job. And so, we'll probably ask you to, meet with the department head, meet with the director of a division. But the centerpiece of the process is a sample lesson. And so, we want to see people do the thing that we're hiring them for. I think, you know, uh, if the job was just about having conversations, that's all that we would do, right? And so I think I'm actually seeing this increasingly, and this is a place where the transferability helps. All of the jobs that I was overseeing when I was in a for-profit world, all of them were task oriented. It was about like, show us the thing that we're hiring you for. And so, whether you're looking at a teaching job or a job in the advancement office or a job, as an assistant, like to a division director or something, we're going to put you through some tasks to see how you actually perform them. So it's a sort of a version of authentic assessment. And so, the one thing I would say, I'll let the others talk about, other like non-teaching roles. But the one thing I would say about the teaching role, which I think is helpful, which I hope is helpful to people, is that there are no secrets in the process. Like you should ask, what matters to the school? Like what's the kind of teaching that matters to you, right? I think sometimes we think, well, it's an audition basically. And so I have to be the teacher on the stage who is doing a lot of talking and a lot of explaining. And certainly it's important to craft your lesson in a way so that you are showing your explanatory power. Like that's important as a teacher. But if that's all that you do, then the signal you're giving to the evaluators is that that's how you teach. That you have there's no, that your range is really small, that your toolbox is really limited. And so if this is a school that is incredibly progressive, just getting up there and lecturing for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 40 minutes, like that's not going to work. So I think it's really important for candidates to ask, do your research, of course. You don't want to ask questions that are answered somewhere else, but do your research and then ask some really good questions about, help me understand how you evaluate teachers. Like what matters to you? Like in your evaluation rubric, what's the most important thing that matters to the school? And if it's like, oh, we really care about kids being collaborative and we want kids to construct knowledge, okay, that's helpful for you to know so that when you structure your lesson, you're doing it in a way that shows that you can play according to those expectations. Do not be sheepish about asking those questions because, like I said, there should be no surprises. They should be very upfront with you about we're looking for these three things in your lesson. 1, 2, and 3. Here they are. And if a school is a little bit cagey about that, then that may not be a great environment for you anyway, right? I would say, like that's a signal to you maybe about whether you're going to be able to thrive and grow in that environment. So, I ask those questions, be really clear about what matters, and I think you'll have a much more successful interview process. And then after that, there'll be sort of reference calls and, maybe follow-ups. And at our school, we end every conversation or every process ends with a conversation with either the head of school or with me. And so that's an important moment just to, talk about how excited you are about the opportunity and the position. At our school, if you get to that point, it means that we're ready to make an offer probably. And so this is the time to like really seal the deal. The one thing I'd say that's a little bit different from independent school hiring versus other industries is that it takes a little bit longer, is what I found. In the for-profit world, from I'm posting the job to the person's hired and working can be as fast as 2 weeks. And that's unheard of in independent schools. I haven't seen that happen yet. So just prepare yourself for a little bit more of a protracted process. And so, while those weeks continue to pile up, just keep the school warm. They're going to be keeping you warm too, but just reach out. I mean, don't apply pressure when you do that. I don't advise that. Like, don't ask things like, where do I stand or how's it going? Am I going to, but rather just say, I'm still excited. Let me know if you need anything else. I'm still here. Just let them know that you're engaged and you care about the role. And just know that if it's taking a while, that might feel like it's unusual and different, but in an independent school world, it really isn't. I'll stop there. If people want to add to that or talk about non-teaching roles.
Yeah, so thinking about timeline, right? Like Ray said, most positions are going to take a while. I had 2 very different hiring processes in independent schools where my first role was for an admin assistant and that for my current role, which is now a director level role. So the admin, basically the higher up the ladder you get, you can expect a more protracted hiring experience. When I was interviewing for my admin assistant position at Trinity, I think that took maybe 3.5 weeks. Especially because it was in the middle of the school year. It was mid-October. They really needed somebody in that role. So I think there was like 3 steps: a phone screen, an in-person interview with my direct supervisors, and then one final conversation with the head of school. So and that was it. 3 weeks, signed and done. For my current role, it was probably took around 3 months from start to finish. I started very traditionally phone screen, went into a Zoom with the hiring committee. And then I had a final round interview that lasted the entire day with multiple constituencies. And for that, I had to prepare writing samples that weren't just writing samples. I was tasked with creating responses to very specific parents' emails that they had received. They wanted to see how I was responding in crisis. They wanted to see how good of a communicator I was. So that was definitely part of it. During that full day interview, I met with everybody because it was a cross divisional role. So I met with all 3 divisional teams. I met with my now supervisor, the head of school, the business office. I met with equity and belonging folks. I met with communications. I met with the PA, the Parents Association, because they expected a lot of collaboration there, and that was important to them. Yeah, and then something that I would like for candidates to look out for is really make a note of like the quirks of the culture of the school, particularly if the school has a different pedagogical model. So Dalton has a very specific pedagogical model. It's called the Dalton Plan. It's kind of a spin-off of Montessori, but it's more structured. So they really believe in this structure. Everything goes through one of their triumvirate: house, which is like a homeroom, lab, which is one-on-one instruction, and assignment, which are these highly detailed long-term assignments that they give kids. So I was tasked to think about how my work could fit into that framework and really live in the school in an authentic way. So yeah, just take a note of any quirks in pedagogy, any quirks in culture, and do the work beforehand to think about how you can apply your work and to make it fit that model and that culture.
I'm just going to double click on everything they all have said, and add one small note to both of their points about meeting with various constituencies. That is, for me, that's paramount, I think, and particularly in a non-instructional role, because even for my role, I had to meet with students. I had to meet with various teams, admin teams across campus, head of school, phone, like all of that happened. But I do want to emphasize one point about having a good sense of the culture, mission, all of that of the school in particular, even when you're in a situation where you're talking with students, because everyone has their expectations for how they want to be treated. And often I find they either want to continue whatever's been happening at that school, or they want something totally different. And so I think one of the things that at least helped me in my interviews when I was going through it, and something that I appreciate when I participated in hiring processes, because I'm doing that even right now in this moment, is the quality of questions you ask during the phone screen will absolutely dictate the quality of any follow-up experience you have with any constituents. So I always ask, what do the students need? What does the faculty want? And what does admin want? And admin, of course, there can be some mixes there. So you might want to distinguish between senior admin and admin, right? But the quality of questions you ask in that phone screen can actually also help you know what to do going forward.
Excellent tips offered by our panelists. Thank you so much. What's like an essential thing that you would say a candidate should do as a follow-up? So they've come to the job fair, they've gone through, they've applied, they've gotten the callback, they've gone through the process. What is an essential to do as a follow-up? Anybody can take that one.
I would say definitely do the traditional thank you letters, thank you emails, post interview, probably no later than a week after that interview process. Something that I did that I think earned me brownie points was I sent an email to the hiring committee thanking them, and to my now supervisor thanking them for the experience. But I also sent a separate thank you email to the admin assistant who was shepherding me through the entire day, making sure that I was fed, hydrated, happy, not too stressed out. She did an incredible job on top of everything else that she had to do that day. So I gave her a shout out, both personally and to my now supervisor. And I think that kind of earned me a little bit of brownie points. Don't forget to thank the helpers.
I would plus one that like to the moon. It's so important. There are so many people who are involved in that day for you. And so, keeping track of all those interactions is really important, those thank you emails. And I would just, this is not about what to do afterward, but Elena just reminded me, every single person you interact with is interviewing you. So bear that in mind that like you don't know what the process looks like once you leave, who's involved. And so just know that you're never really off until you actually leave. And it's a very long day. And so just be mindful that, if you've got a 15-minute break or 20-minute break and they're like, you can feel free to walk around the campus and strike up conversations with people, and ask kids, hey, what's it like here? Or whatever is pertinent to your role. Like those are golden opportunities for you to learn more about the role, but for people to be, yeah, that person asked me really good questions and I was really impressed, right? So I think just like being mindful that you're on stage the entire time can really be helpful, and then keep track of who you want to thank afterwards. So that was awesome, Elena. I couldn't agree more.
I'm in complete agreement about the thank you notes.
I would argue that the thank you notes should not be sent a week later. I think timing is important.
Yes.
I would
Maybe
do,
pushing it, probably 48 hours.
yeah, at max. Um, because you have no idea, sometimes you know where you are in the order and sometimes you don't. And our schools seem to like to gather feedback um, from the different people that you interview with, and you never know how quickly that feedback is going to be gathered and how quickly the deciding team is going to be making an offer. So the sooner you can stay relevant and recognize their time and what you've learned from the experience, and it doesn't have to be a long drawn out message. It's just an acknowledgement of the day, how much you enjoyed, the time that you spent, how much you learned as a result, and that your interest was further uh uh amplified as a result. Like anything along those lines, much better than waiting much longer to send because you're waiting for perfection. Like don't let perfectly good get in the way of perfection, or don't let perfection get in the way of perfectly good, whatever that expression is. So everyone's favorite question is, how do salaries and benefits compare? And I think it's important to note that from the beginning, none of us are ever going to be compensated at the level that we think it is equated with our value and worth plus tax. Let's own that up front. It would be helpful if the panelists could highlight some of the independent school perks that provide some context for some of the adjustment in salary from the most obvious fewer number of days, fewer number of students in a classroom, or fewer number of students in your load in the case of you, Okosua, or you, Elena, in terms of the ways that you work in particular, to some of the other less obvious things. So let's go Okosua, Ray, and then Elena.
Sure. So this I love talking about money because people are always afraid to talk about it. um okay, so I would say that some of the benefits that I experience, and I'll be specific to my context actually, because it was a hugely important driving factor. So one, we're in New York City. I have free parking at my school. I know that is not possible at every school, certainly not commonly at the Manhattan independent schools, but sometimes it can be part of your experience. It's something that I value. It gives me a lot more flexibility, especially because I don't live in the immediate vicinity of where I work or close by, as is the case for most people. I would say I experience greater flexibility as a whole. It is easier, let's say if I have appointments, doctor's appointments, for example, for me to get out and be able to do that. And I note that because for some people that's really important, depending on whatever your needs might be. I value that I don't know. This one is maybe like a weird thing to name in this context, right? But particularly in my experience in my office, we have a smaller office. There's only like a small handful of us who actually are there. And part of the benefit for me is not just the flexibility within like any personal needs I might have, but the flexibility we also have across the board as a team and seeing that actually live out. I want to name this because it's really easy to kind of individualize some of these benefits, but it actually helps to be in a context where everyone is experiencing this, because I've worked in a lot of contexts where that hasn't been true, broadly true for everyone that's working there. And so I just want to name that.
Yeah, plus one to all of those things. I think it's, schools are flexible human organisms. And so I think that it's great. That's a big plus. I'll just sort of say, I kind of alluded to this earlier. There's something about being in a school community. I mean, kids are wonderful. And so being around kids is a benefit. Full stop, right? And then also, there's a lot of life of the school stuff that you just can't get in other environments, right? So incredible speakers, like events, like things that, are about academic pursuits, or things that are about community, or things that are about family. I mean, there's a way that an independent school community can feel like a family business sometimes, maybe sometimes to a detriment, but there's a lot of good. There's a lot of good that comes with that. And so it's almost like when you join an independent school as an employee, like you join, and if you so choose, so does your family. Your family becomes part of the school too, if you so choose. So do, like your work day um, may be populated with things that are unusual in your compared to where you're coming from, but they're normal in an independent school. Like the idea of staying until 7 p.m. to watch the musical, like that's not unusual. Before I leave, I'm gonna go stop by the gym to see how the girls basketball team does. Like that's stuff that if that really gets your like drives you and gets your engine going, like that's incredible. And you can't really you can't put that on a benefits one pager, but it's there. And for me, it really matters.
So there are, apart from like the little culture quirks that make this experience feel more like a home than it does a job, there are certain like on paper perks that you should keep an eye and ear out for. One of them is housing. I think my previous institution and my current institution possess buildings that are rent stabilized and are on offer to employees. You have to apply, but they're on offer just in case you need to relocate. That's one example. We get free lunch every day. It's really good lunch. It's not New York City Department of Ed lunch. What else? The professional development and the investment in professional development cannot be stated. Like, it's incredible, and it's not something that I ever got in finance, to be honest with you. You would think, you would get substantial professional development in finance. No, you get professional development to keep track of, like, to maintain your license, right? And it's very different. At Dalton, I think I get something like $3,500 or $3,800 a year to myself to do whatever kind of professional development that I want. That could be replenishing my professional library, that could be going to conferences, that could be taking courses, that could be payment for a graduate degree, that could be a one-time payment towards student loans. It could be used in myriad ways, and it's probably one of the most flexible arrangements that I've ever had. So professional development, definitely look out for how the school is investing in your growth after you get this job.
Thank you all. One thing that I want to add for those of you that are thinking about, should there be a shortfall between what you wanted to earn or what previously earning and whatever is offered, there's always coaching opportunities that are for additional remuneration at our schools, 3 seasons. And I know the athletic department is always interested in making sure that dedicated adults are working with students and helping them to grow as athletes as well. There are also summer camp and after school and early morning experiences, which are also opportunities for people to have additional compensation. And one of the things that I've also always appreciated is just the opportunity to be able to see students in a variety of different ways, whether it's chaperoning a trip or an overnight experience, to be able to see students beyond who they are as students and in an academic setting, to see them as musicians and artists and athletes and student leaders and orators and debaters and all the different opportunities that our schools afford students both locally and nationally and even internationally, given how schools are really dedicated to exposing students to the world that we're living in. All of that I think is really key and critical. So panelists, I'm going to give you one question, the final question for you all to think about. I'm going to close this out and then invite you to speak in. So your final question is, what keeps you in these schools? Like, you were somewhere before, some of you left, came back, left, came back. Whatever it is, what's keeping you? And while you all are contemplating that question, I want to remind everybody, please pre-register for the NYSAIS Job Fair to be held on Saturday, February 24th at Columbia Grammar and Prep on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Please pre-register by this Friday in order to secure that your materials will be part of the database that will be shared with our over 90 schools that will be present and actively networking on Saturday at the day of the fair. I also want to remind everyone, if you attend on the day of the fair and you have not pre-registered, let's just say you forgot, you can still register on the day of. You can tell anybody you want to come on the day of. What we ask is that you bring your labeled resume on a flash drive, and we will assist you. The whole process will take you 5 minutes, and you can join and network as well. Please definitely arrive by 9:30 so we can take you through all the last minute tips and suggestions that we have to really maximize the day. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, Liz Fernandez. My email address is jobfair@nysais.org. Just don't wait for the last minute. This is really important. It's the only time that this job fair happens. It's been in existence for 35 years, and there are many, many people who are working in these schools as a result of this particular job fair. So I want to make sure that you have the opportunity to network and pursue exploring what does it mean to be part of our over 200 schools in the state of New York alone. And 90 will be present from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, California, and Massachusetts. So we are well represented. So with that, I'm going to ask Ray, then Elena, then Akosua. Brief, what keeps you?
And you have to pick on me first. I think independent schools are able to take big swings at hard problems, and I want to be in that kind of environment.
I think giving kids of color a better experience and more experiences than I did in my time at an independent school.
The people. It's the people for me. Getting to be around people that I want to learn from, that I like growing with, that I like working alongside, and help supporting students with. The best people I've met have been in independent schools more often than that. So.
What a perfect way to end. Akosua, Ray, Elena, thank you so much. We are so grateful for your time and your talent. Matt, behind the scenes at NYSAIS, thank you so much for your assistance. Everyone who joined us live, thank you for being here. And anyone who is watching, if you have any additional questions, want to reach out, jobfair@nysais.org. Thank you so much. Have a great evening, everybody. Be safe, stay healthy.
Good luck.
Thanks all.